So we will start now this panel. So this panel, it's the legacy of life cycle in the cities. Sorry, I have two. The Legacy Life Cities project.
I'm sorry. That's mine. Okay.
And we have Paulo de Carvalho. He is from Value Flow Association. We also have Rebecca Saltman.
Yes. Okay.
And Mila Aliana.
Yes.
Mila Aliana.
Yes.
You are from Brazil?
No, I'm from Indonesia, but I'm from Indonesia, but I'm based in the UK.
Okay, very well. Nice to meet you. And we have also John Evans that will participate online in this panel. And we will start with the framework presentation from Paulo, and then he also will present all the participants that we have here in this panel. Paulo, you can begin.
Okay. I don't know if I can have the slides, because I want to invite you on a journey, a trip in time, a travel in time, but above all, a travel in imagination. So the invitation is for you to travel in your imagination. So I don't know if I can have the first slide in. Okay. So the question that we are holding and the invite for your travel in imagination is, can we organize cities with the dream and vision of leaving a legacy of life? Which, if you unfold, the proposal has two dimensions. So the dimension of legacy, meaning that not designing cities for today or eventually tomorrow, but for generations to come. And what that bears in mind when you think on multi-generational, time-wise paths. And to sustain life. What does that mean? A city that organizes to sustain life. And I will put some ingredients, and while I'll put some ingredients of what that could be, what that twinkles in me, in my own imagination, I will invite you to do the same in your own imagination, and look around and try to find elements in this room, outside, that somehow connect to that are already clues on how to do this. And the questions that I would bring along are questions like, can we design cities for belonging? Or can we design cities for compassion? Or if cities could be designed for embracing the unknown in a way that we develop ourselves through that journey? Or can we think of cities that put life at the center, and what does that mean? And I will now invite you to travel back in time until we arrive today. And I came with these patterns because this first pattern is a circle. This is frequently the way we organized human settlements, in a circle. It's still very visible if you look into ancient cultures or people living in the Amazon. This is the way they organize still. And at the center of these circles, it's frequently the center where community makes their own decision, their thinking, they're making sense of the world together. And those were the patterns that frequently lead to some elements of design. And these evolve over time to be expanding because more people were gathered in fixed from nomad kind of settlements to fixed settlements once we started to be farmers, once we became farmers. And the form that frequently emerged out of this settlement was that one. Still pretty much organic, probably with some protection, and protection came as a very critical element. You see here, Lisbon still has the walls on a castle. But there were some key elements that continue. First, there was still a sense of centrality, of being common, of being part of this frontier, although the membranes got more rigid. Water was frequently in the center. We organize ourselves around water as a key element of life. And there were, in the outskirts, probably places where we produce our own food, but then frequently to the external ring of that, still forests. Still places where the contact with nature was immediate. It was in a traveling distance, very, very, very near to these kind of arrangements. And this still informs a lot of the design that already exists in cities as a legacy from the past. But then there was a moment in time where we started to organize around the matrix, the geometrical streets. And that's the pattern that still informs city design today. If you look macro, that's the pattern that informs. And with this pattern came the conformity of things, starting with probably the conformity of water. We channelize the water to obey to these patterns, right? Many of the water streams in cities are no longer visible. They conform to these very rigid structures. And we started organizing life in a way that functions took over livelihood. So frequently streets organized around functions. So in Lisbon City you can see that, because on downhill the main streets still have the name of the function that people were exercising in the city. But still fundamentally when we started, life was organized vertically, meaning that you would work probably downstairs, live upstairs, everything was near, walking distance, we could not travel much. So the patterns would still somehow inherit from these ones. So this is the structures that we layer ourselves in thinking cities for the future. This is still the constraints that we now use, which the geometric constraints just reflect our thinking. And Elena was saying back there that the problem is the thinking, and I do believe it is. So let's look at cities as living beings. So you get the sense that just as analyzing traffic, this is from Uber analysis, right? Technology plays an important role and it gives a visibility of cities. So you can have a sense of a heartbeat of a city. And how cities, where does the heart beat? And around what? And still the main sensation that we have in terms of organizing cities is we organize cities fundamentally for work. I would say for business, for money, for a money outcome, for an economic outcome. So you would see people coming in, people coming out of cities. If you look at city flows, there's an inflow of value. What are cities attracting in terms of multitude of values? So a lot of people that commute every day, because they don't live no longer in a vertical arrangement in a city, so they need to commute. They commute because of work. That's the main reason for commuting, not because they want to live, right? It's not an invitation for living in the city. It's an invitation for working in the city. That's what informs. So what else are cities attracting? You can see a lot of trucks with a lot of stuff coming every day, right? With a lot of food, with a lot of goods, with a lot of products, with a lot of things that then result in consumption. And those are the inflows. And how can we think of the value we collectively created in a different way? And also look into cities with their responsibility to connect in reciprocity with the neighbor cities that they are attached to. So it's no longer just looking at the city as a single element around which you could design, but how can we look at cities as hubs of life and invites cities to take their responsibility of the livelihood that they enable, or constrain, or destroy. So that they realize that they are part of an interconnected ecosystem where people sometimes live, just sleep, probably, not really live, right? And how this connects to further away realities of products and services that need to flow. And what is the responsibility that cities could embrace if they only organize differently? And therefore we propose, there's a lot of big thinking which is necessary sometimes on how cities could organize, what could trigger cities' organizations. And frequently we end up with a lot of constraints, economical constraints, we need a lot of money, thinking we need to do this in a larger scale, there's a lot of material goods and transformation that is needed, there's technology that we could inform cities on how they organize themselves, we can improve traffic, but my question is, what is the thinking? That kind of envisioning of smart cities, what informs that envision? Is it life? Is it leaving a legacy to others? So we imagine that we could start transforming cities from within as acupuncture interventions around the idea of a legacy house. And what is a legacy house? It's a possibility, it's an imagination. So you would tell me more than we already discussed. But you can imagine it as if you were doing an intervention, a very chirurgic intervention around which things would start to change. Like planting this seed that we know can potentially be a fantastic tree with a lot of life. And around which do we need to rethink this idea of a legacy house as an acupuncture point, where cities could have plenty of legacy houses. We came with 3 different realms that we think inform what this could be. And the first we called, and this is the intersection of many worlds that we are the intersection of as individuals. So the first one is the inner world. We can call this inner development, but we can call it in a way of how can we really skill ourselves to be compassionate, to embrace cities of belonging, so to be welcoming, to be kind. How can we upskill our thinking in a way that we design for these qualities that, if you think, are probably the ones you value the most? And value, it's a very important thing. And that brings us to the second realm. If we think that on the inner world we can start imagining different possibilities, we would say that the second realm would be a collective one, what is made of our social imagination. So we call it the social imaginary. And what is this? Is that many of the things that seem to constrain us are man-made. We made them. So we can think of different arrangements of those. And this means democracy, governance, economics. We usually say that economics is a strange thing because we are the only beings that created something upon which we depend upon, right? We created money, and it seems that we depend on money to live, which it's awkward as a social imaginary creation. So how can we imagine different things? And then finally, the natural world. Not because we want to make cities more sustainable, I think this is a good thing, because we lost touch with nature. So therefore we need to bring nature to where people are. Because nature is our master teacher. And we only learn so much from nature. But if we don't see nature on a day-to-day reality, then what are we learning? And those are the questions that we are somehow holding. Thank you.
I should say that we are very aligned, I think all of us, because it's all about happiness and to develop sustainability center in people. I should say people, not only in terms of happiness of the persons, but also about legacy, identity, traditions. I think that there's a sustainable development concept from Ignatius Sachs that adds two pillars besides the three that we are used to see about sustainable development. Normally we see sustainable development around the social, environment and economy, or with the ACG, environment, social and governance. And the two pillars that he had in sustainable development vision, this concept, one, the fourth pillar is time. That is very important, not only to have intergenerational justice, because we have to be aware that we have to have resources for the future generations, but also the actual generation be solidarity with the generation before, when our fathers and grandmothers fight for the liberty, for peace, for democracy, and base values that are very important to have freedom, to have liberty, to have different cities today. And the fifth pillar that he mentioned is about identity of territories and the happiness of people. Develop policies, put persons in the center to have happier cities. So I noticed that Rebecca take a lot of notes when Paul was talking. So Rebecca, this is a very, I should say, are we talking, and the Paul interventions is something that is very far, or can we really switch nowadays the generation for these visions?
I have these conversations pretty much every day with these two lovely people, and some of you in the audience. I believe that part of this is our going back to the future. So part of our conversations was this reminiscence, this remembering of being a child and being able to run in the street with the neighbors. And
swim in the rivers.
Swim in the rivers, sledding down the little hills in the yards. And there was a freedom of that, but now we're all in security and lockdown, right? We don't have that opportunity because cities don't allow us to connect to one another, right? The other piece is that I lived on a dead-end road, or in polite culture, you'll call it a cul-de-sac. And my parents, if they needed a babysitter, would call across the street. Or if we needed something for a recipe, they'd give me a key to go into the neighbor's house and go grab 2 eggs or a cup of milk. We don't know our neighbors anymore. We don't have those pieces anymore. So in order to think about cities that are our legacy, how are we connecting with one another instead of being separate from one another? That's one piece. And the other piece is that you mentioned time, but that time and attention are our most important currencies. of this era. And we have minimized the value and the flow of our time and attention. So, therefore, how do we leave a legacy if we are not considering our time and attention as part of our city life, as part of our living, and it's part of life? When we say that time equals money, we are devaluing our time. And in order to live life, and in order to be engaged in life, we actually have to consider these pieces in the first and foremost. I think it's a small turn, and it's still possible.
John Evans, you are online. We are very near us because you are the biggest guy in the room. This is a big hall, so nice to meet you online. And I think, John Evans are a sustainable leading expert, I should say, in not only in engineering process and urban planning also. And this is very important to have these, I should say, these intangible values that we should take in the cities, not only in all projects that are more materials, but also in terms of governance.
John, we don't have volume.
John, only 1 minute because we don't have your audio. You can speak when we try to see if you can your line in the room. John, can you speak only to? Can you test?
Not working.
Can't
hear you.
Jen, can you test again?
Nope.
Not yet.
Your mic is on, yes? Yes. Okay. Yes, we will. Okay. John, we will come back to you in a minute only to try to solve this technical problem. Mila, you have a completely different experience, and you live in a region that maybe have these values in consideration when you live in your community. Can you share with us how can we back to the roots, as Flavio already said in the panel before?
So I've lived in I come from Indonesia. My father comes from a village up in the mountains. There's no running water, no electricity. And yet I left since I was 3 and lived in Europe and the States. So I had the dichotomy
These
of different
experiences.
So I would say, building on what Rebecca and Paul has said, it's really the focus is relationship. So basically, underlying all that has been said, and I would add to what you said about focusing on humans, is focusing on nature. We are nature. There's no doubt about it. Just take a deep breath and don't breathe, and you depend on nature to get your breathing going, and we die in an instant. If you don't have food, you don't have water. So that, in essence, if you live in communities of developing countries, we know that. We know that from an embodied cellular level, from generation, that you live with nature. So how do you redesign the cities that focuses on relationship and interconnection and interdependency? Because when everything is interdependent, everything matters, such as architecture. Can we look at how do we design architecture from the nature's lens? And there are many examples of this. So instead of starting from scratch, you have places in Essen in Germany that design their drainage system through natural infrastructure. It works perfectly. The fishes have come back into the streams that were not there before. You have Nottingham that has reduced 60% of their carbon emission through urban ecosystem, not focusing on creating more parks, but creating nature spots that creates the urban ecosystem in a natural process way. You have Curitiba in Brazil, right? And that's amazing. That's 99% of Curitiba residents are very happy of what has happened and developed in their city over, I don't know, since 1990s, you know, so that they've been voted as in 2010 as the sustainable development city in the world. So it comes back to this relationship, and all of those were co-designed together. It wasn't the government, it wasn't the people who had money, it was also in discussion with grassroots people. We have this, there needs a shift in consciousness that everyone needs to be in part of this design. It is a mycelium collaboration, and to Paul's design there of different from circle to matrix, that matrix is really a mycelium. So how do we create not a centralized command and control, but really how nature actually works, bringing creativity, bringing fun, to Rebecca's point about being able to play in the, you know, in the streets, and bringing trust back. You cannot do this without having trust, and not like 100,000 people is not going to be trusting each other, but having a flock of communities in neighborhoods trusting each other, collaborating with the next neighborhood and the next neighborhood as a city, that will co-evolve together as nature. Because it's not a static place, the city. It needs to co-evolve together. So how does architecture, governance, economy, society informs all of this design as a co-evolve evolution, as nature does brilliantly, and experiment this rather than talking about shock. And in the main impact stage this morning, there's a lot of talk. What about having a lot of shared experiments and living labs and showcasing examples that I have given to hear it directly from people who's doing this, rather than trying to do it from scratch.
Paulo, do you believe that this legacy vision concept could be more solid to disseminate the word in terms of sustainability?
If we believe, so first let me emphasize that this is not a kind of academic proposition. So it's something that we want to materialize in concrete, and in fact there are a lot of examples that grasp some dimension of that, from which we learn and from which we want to connect. And we started with this center in Bucharest, which is a co-work. It was the first legacy house, the first experiment to start playing with these concepts. So it's a practical thing. And it's the practical laboratory where we learn how to rethink, because if we think that thinking is the problem, as was said before, so we need spaces to be able to think differently, to evolve our thinking, to gain perspective, to make sense of what we are trying to achieve in a way that is informed by nature and makes sense for everyone in the community.
It's
like, so it's a practical.
It's like a contaminate thing that we should, in a positive way, that we should spread through the communities.
Yeah, and we can see it as, like Mila said, as living labs, as sandboxes where we could eventually even relax some of the regulation so that we learn, we deeply learn, right? And therefore we then adjust regulation to what seems to be of potential, instead of trying to figure it out all and completely, because we don't have time to that.
And did you work with kids in this project?
Sorry?
Did you work with schools and
yes,
kids?
So that's fundamental, because learning is cross-generational. It's a cross-generational exercise that somehow, because we matrix it out, we broken in terms of we think that kids need to learn in that place, on that block, right? So it's necessary that part of this is reinvented by kids themselves, They would teach us so much.
Okay. I don't know if we already have John Evans online. Should we? So, okay, I will continue passing to Rebecca. John, you are again here. Now we hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Very well. Thank you, John, for your persistence and resilience. So I came back to the first question, but can you add? I don't know if you heard the last interventions about the participation of schools and kids, the importance of education to change this mindset in terms of legacy.
Sure. And by the way, I'm actually this tall. I'm really this big. It's funny seeing myself this big. First of all, thank you for all the interventions. And Paulo's opening words were just beautiful. Most of my work for the last 10 years has been focused on the economic metrics of well-being. What people don't think about is that GDP is an economic metric of well-being. Just ironically and sadly and devastatingly, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of one part of financial and growth metrics that ignore the majority of who we are as people, and just, or even more worse than that, completely ignores the environment, ecosystems, animals, and especially caregiving. I say caregiving because if you think about, and I'm quoting from a hero of mine named Mila Aliana, whose work I cannot recommend highly enough. She has an idea of what's called domination versus partnership. And I'm getting to your question about kids and cities, but I want to start from a paradigm level. Any city in the world you go to, if you look up what sort of climate, meaning not just the physical climate, but the feeling that you have. Obviously, every city in the world, every culture is different. One metric that the entire world shares, however, is GDP. And since after the Second World War with Bretton Woods, all these definitions came into play based on financial metrics. And if you get to know the GDP, it's a backwards-facing metric, which means you have to do something first and then say, how did we do? So you also don't walk around in your life, sort of living your life in the moment. And all these things tie back to ideologies that really say, in modern times, the majority of the planet believes the ideology that growth equals, and I should say unfettered fiscal growth equals societal success. Whereas my friend Mila, who is the reason I'm here, so thank you to Mila, and so many other indigenous leaders and people in the sustainability movement remind me every day that the planet, we are part of the planet, and that includes cities, of course. But like Paulo mentioned in the beginning, how it sort of evolved cities, and I'm paraphrasing here, has moved from sort of gathering around water or resources where we need to live, but that the community then work together for each other. Or in Ubuntu ethics, there's this lovely term called I am because we are, to this very, certainly in America where I live, utterly isolationist mindset that the individual can do everything on their own. And this is not just a sort of political ideology. It stems from this idea that I only have worth based on my wealth. And so going back to education, Mia Eisler again has all these books, and the latest one focuses on childhood education, where if we're able to bring caregiving to children, certainly through cities, in terms of how cities are put together, everything even from how you can plan where kids walk from point A to point B. Can they walk through a park versus a city street? This increases physiological well-being. Right? There's so many things with city planning that can increase anyone's well-being. But the thing about kids is if you invest in them when they're younger to make sure their mental and emotional development is sort of on track, GDP goes up in the sense that you save millions and millions of dollars, and this is US, but it's pretty common around the world, in terms of they have a sense of self. They recognize that money is important, but it's not the only thing. Final thing I'll say about cities, I just came back from a conference and I got to meet another hero of mine named William McDonough, who created the idea of cradle to cradle, that whole logic. And he has a city, a set of buildings in Amsterdam. It's just incredible. There's 9 buildings, and they're connected through these, pipes and tubes and wires, whatever, but very, natural. Where each of the buildings helps the other buildings. So once one building has enough energy, any excess of energy, based on solar panels, etc., goes to the other buildings. And then also things like gray water is used for flushing toilets, versus in the US, a lot of times drinking water is used in toilets, which makes no sense. So I bring it up to say that modern design can very easily create, through biomimicry, a sense of how buildings can sort of form a living kind of entity. And this is also a reflection of knowing how we're being cared for, where cities are when planning for the future. Anyway, that was a bit all over the place, but I'll stop right there.
Amazing.
Thank you, John. A round of applause for the great intervention. John, we have a lack of time, but I have to make you a question. Do you think that is the priority of some indicators or importance that we give to the GDP instead of other indicators, like Human Development Index or even the footprint calculation? Or do you think that we should have another indicator that could mix and make a blend of everything?
Sure, and I should say, I didn't mention, I work with Mila with an organization called IEEE, the world's largest technology association, global part of the engineering world, and I lead their sustainability practices for the IEEE Standards Association. One thing with metrics is that there is not one metric to rule them all. This is why we're in such a state, because GDP has come to be the one metric that everyone recognizes. But in places like Bhutan, with gross national happiness, they changed I think the amount of carbon, above Bhutan to actually make sure that the forests.
The World Happiness Report you mentioned. It's the World Happiness Report that you are mentioning, yes?
No.
Bhutan's gross national happiness is one of the oldest metrics that was inspired by Bobby Kennedy's speech.
Okay.
Speech. The World Happiness Report is excellent and reflects Bhutan. My point here being that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the main reason they are sort of a metric for success that society should focus on, is really about the fact that they're holistic in nature. We can't only eliminate poverty, we also have to have equity. We can't only increase water, we have to have land regeneration practices that most or many First Nations or Indigenous peoples have done for millennia. The holistic aspect of how we move forward, put simply, every piece of technology, every policy must prioritize the long-term environmental or ecological flourishing and human well-being. And there are multiple indexes to do these things. We have to stop worrying so much about, by the way, your question is excellent. My point is that what I've heard, because I've also written a lot about positive psychology, a lot of times people say, well, these are squishy metrics, human well-being and happiness. And this is a pejorative term. In English, squishy sort of means it's too emotional, and there's no data to support what you're talking about. And that's simply completely factually untrue. There's massive amounts of data from Gallup, massive amounts of data from the World Health Organization. Once and for all, society needs to set the metrics of success all are that first of all we have a planet that we treat with respect as Mother Earth, that we recognize is a living entity that demands rights in the same way that people should have rights. Secondly, the humans, especially children, certainly women, LGBT, etc., all humans in terms of equity. If we actually want equity, this is where once and for all we have to say GDP has not and will not get us to a safe and habitable planet for all. And more importantly, why would we not want to focus on healing and helping our beautiful Mother Earth, and then making sure that all of our future generations, for 7 generations and beyond, are safe and healthy? This is a metric for success that is a starting point. That's the starting point. And it doesn't mean that I tell anyone how they should live their lives, except it does say, are we going to say as a society that flourishing for planet and people, all people, is the measure of success? Or do we continue living with the deadly lie that GDP will work for all? It's not working for all right now. Our planet is in an absolute climate crisis. And if we want to actually be caregivers and have cities that prioritize caregiving, we need to measure it. And we can't.
Okay.
Can you let Paulo talk about indicators?
I can give a contribution on the indicators because we felt the need to come up with a new proposition of indicators, and I will explain just in a while why. Because most of our indicators, they are prescriptive in a way. They have they propose a vision for the world, right? And we are trying to build an indicator that we call Life Contribution Index, which is an awareness-based indicator, which means that if you are paying attention to certain element, then that means that there's where you have your energy. You would start realizing how that indicator connects to everything else, and how indicators are intertwined and interdependent, so that you expand your consciousness of what is going on there, how you make sense of that particular indicator, how does it inform you about some things, but how limited is it in informing about something else? Because what we discovered is that when you zoom in a certain problem, let's say education, is that the problem in education is not in education, it's in economy, it's in healthcare, is in access, is in culture, is in how you create the conditions for education, is in what are you educating for. So it goes far beyond than just that single answer. And what we're trying to show is that interconnecting many indicators that exist so that they are useful until the point where they come too short. If you think on water, for instance, everyone could be starting or having a consumption, a conscious consumption, which is important, and awareness, and therefore actions that lead to that. So taking more care, using reusable bottles, that kind of things. But ultimately, we should understand water as a living entity that enables life. So, and there's a journey to do that, right? Of many information, let's call it indicators, data points, that could help you raising that understanding. And that's a little bit the proposition.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for your participation. You have to move on because we are very late in terms of our, I should say, panel. That is very interesting. And I would like only to finish that one of the statements of Scouts normally is related in one interesting phrase. I also put it in my book. That during decades we are used to trying to let a better world to our children. And in fact, we have to let better children in our world. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank you, John Evans, if you are hearing us.